$97 trillion. That is what every government on Earth owes, right now, combined. Global GDP, 105 trillion. The world owes almost exactly what it earns in a year, and the number has never come back down. Priya arrives at the hospital at 6 in the morning. She already knows what she will find. The supply room has been running low for 3 weeks. Not empty, just less. A little less insulin, a little less gauze, a little less of everything. She makes a list of what she has, then a list of what she needs. Then she folds the second list and puts it in her pocket. There is no point showing it to anyone. Sri Lanka has run out of foreign currency. The government cannot buy what Priya needs, and Priya cannot fix that. She is a nurse in Colombo in 2022. Downstream of a decision made in a bond market on the other side of the world. $97 trillion. That is the total amount every government on Earth owes right now, every country, everyone. And yet the system keeps running. Bonds get issued, buyers show up, interest gets paid. What I want to understand, and what I think most coverage completely misses, is who actually pays when it stops. Because it is never the people who designed the system. It is always someone like Priya. Today, we are going to follow 3 people. Margaret, a retired school teacher in Ohio, who has no idea the American government owes her money. Fatima, in Zambia, who is about to find out what happens when a debt you did not choose becomes one you cannot escape. And Priya, who is already living in the answer. But first, what the number actually means. $97 trillion. That is total global sovereign debt as of 2024, according to the IMF. Global GDP, everything every country produces in a year, is roughly 105 trillion. So the world owes collectively almost exactly what it earns in a year. That sounds manageable until you look at the direction of travel. In 2000, that ratio was around 60%. In 2008, it crossed 80. By 2020, after pandemic spending, it hit 99. It has not come back down. Japan's debt to GDP ratio is 255%. The United States is at 122 and rising. Italy sits at 137. These are not failing states. These are the world's largest economies, and they are all still borrowing. Not because their finance ministers are reckless, because the alternative, cutting fast enough to actually reduce the debt, would require a level of austerity that no democratic government has survived politically. Greece tried. Between 2010 and 2018, it cut deeper than almost any country in modern history. Its economy shrank by 25%. Unemployment hit 27. Youth unemployment peaked at 60. The debt still had to be restructured anyway. So we have a system where debt grows, austerity fails, and restructuring is treated as catastrophe. And yet the system keeps functioning. Here is something that changes how you see all of this. Margaret is 67 years old. She lives in Ohio. For 35 years, she paid into a state pension fund, the kind of quiet, reliable thing you do and then forget about. She has no idea that a portion of that fund is invested in US Treasury bonds. She has no idea that the American government owes her, personally, money, that every month the state pays her interest on debt she did not know she held. She calls it her retirement. The financial press calls it sovereign debt. It is the same thing. This is the first thing most people get wrong about who holds the debt. It is not China. It is not a shadowy creditor class. About 70% of US sovereign debt is held domestically by pension funds, insurance companies, the Federal Reserve, and through them, ordinary people like Margaret. The state owes its own citizens. It pays them interest. The money rotates inside the system. Now here is the other version of that story. Fatima lives in Zambia. Her country also has debt, but denominated in dollars, not its own currency. When the Zambian kwacha fell 30% in 2020, Zambia's debt became 30% more expensive overnight. Without anyone voting on it, without any policy change, without warning. Margaret in Ohio felt nothing. Fatima felt everything. That is the difference between debt you control and debt someone else does. Both are called sovereign debt. They are not the same thing. Here is the mechanism in plain terms. A government issues a bond. An investor buys it, a small, reliable return, backed by the government's power to tax and, ultimately, to print currency. That spending flows into the economy, generates tax revenue, which services the interest on the bond. The cycle continues. It works until something breaks the trust. Greece broke it in 2010, not because it suddenly became poorer, but because markets recalculated the probability of repayment and decided the risk was no longer worth the return. Within months, borrowing costs went from 4% to over 15%. At 15%, debt becomes self-accelerating. You borrow more just to pay the interest on what you already owe. The math stops working. The Eurozone intervened. not out of generosity, but because a Greek default would have triggered contagion across Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese debt. The bailout was, at its core, a trust maintenance operation. Some economists, Stephanie Kelton among them, argue that for governments which issue their own currency, the real constraint is not solvency, but inflation, and that the system is more flexible than markets assume.
But as someone who's been trying to change the way we think about deficits and government spending, I saw this as an opportunity to show why government budgets don't work like household budgets.
That argument has force, particularly for the United States, but it offers nothing at all to countries like Zambia or Greece, which cannot print the currency they owe. That is the fragile thing at the center of all of this, not the debt itself, the belief underneath it. This is how sovereign debt becomes personal, not through default, not through crisis, through the slow, quiet transfer of cost from the balance sheet to the lives of people who trusted the numbers. In Greece, the transfer was faster and had a face. Dimitri Christoula was 77 years old, a retired pharmacist. In April 2012, he took his own life in Syntagma Square in Athens. The note he left said he could not face the prospect of foraging through rubbish bins for food. The pension cuts imposed as part of the bailout conditions had reduced his income by more than half. He is not a data point in the IMF's adjustment program. He is the cost of the mechanism. These are not edge cases. They are the human resolution of an equation that governments and markets solve in the abstract. The IMF projects global sovereign debt to reach 100% of global GDP by 2030. And that assumes no major recession, no new pandemic, no war requiring emergency spending at scale. All three of those assumptions are fragile. What is more likely than collapse is what economists call financial repression. Governments holding interest rates below inflation for years, slowly shrinking the real value of the debt. You do not announce it. You let time do the work. The debt stays on the books. The value it represents diminishes. The people holding it, pension funds, insurance companies, retirees, absorb the difference, quietly, over decades. It has happened before. The United States reduced its debt to GDP ratio from 119% in 1946 to 31% by 1974, not by paying it down, but by growing the economy and running moderate inflation for nearly 3 decades. Nobody called it a crisis. Most people barely noticed. But that was a world with rising wages, expanding middle classes, and a broad, shared belief that the future was getting bigger. Priya is still at the hospital. The supply list in her pocket has not changed. Tomorrow she will make the same 2 lists, what she has and what she needs, and she will fold the second one away again, not because she has given up, because the system that was supposed to answer it, actual documentation, internal use only, not for distribution.